Hello and welcome back. I'm Shayna Cersei and I'm so excited to paint with you today. So we are going to be doing another page in our watercolor journals, and as you can see I have mine taped out already. So I'm going to be doing 4 different little experiments here in my watercolor journal. So if you are new here, we paint in our watercolor journals regularly and do lots and lots of different subjects and play and experiments, and that's what our journal is for, is to really keep painting regularly, not treat things too preciously, experiment, play, and have fun. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about wet on wet versus wet on dry and doing gradient washes. Now that might sound boring, like gradient washes, but we're going to make it fun. I'm going to use 2 different colors, and I'm going to be doing a vignette. So creating darker edges around the sides and lighter in the middle, rather than just gradient from one side to the other. So I am going to just go over supplies and materials really quick for those of you who are new. For returners, you probably know this spiel already, but you can look in the description of the video for links to supplies and materials that I use regularly and in this video in particular, but there's a few more listed in there as well. So the book that I'm using, this is a Bao Hong 6x9 watercolor journal. It's 100% cotton paper and it's 140-pound cold pressed. I do paint on both sides of my paper, so just know that I paint on one side and the other side. So I use every single sheet in this book and surface. I am using my Core QOR by Golden mini watercolor palette. This is a great little palette that packs a real punch. Lots of just enough colors, so 12 different colors in all the colors that you would need to create pretty much and mix any other color that you might want, but great little palette. And I'm going to be using my Velvet Touch brush. I'm using a set of round brushes. I have Velvet Touch size 10 and 4. Maybe I'll stick with those, but I also have a rigger over here, as well as my Silver Black Velvet size 8, I believe. Yes. Okay. So let's get into the gradient washes. So gradient washes are something you're going to use a ton in watercolor, wherein you have to go from a transition of a dark area to a lighter area, and you don't want it to be like a hard line. You want it to be gradual and smooth. So that's what we're going to do today. I saw someone struggling with this the other day on a forum where they went from like dark to light, and it was like they wanted that smooth transition. They weren't sure how to get it. So there are 2 techniques I'm just going to show you. One is wet on wet, where we wet the paper first and then add wet watercolor to it to then create the transition. And the other is wet on dry. So we use wet paint on a dry surface and then use our brush and our water to blend it out. And I'll go over the difference between the 2, why you might want to use one over the other as we go. And I figured we'll do it at least in 2 colors. I'll do a lighter color and a darker color. So the first one I'm going to do, I'm going to pick up Phthalo blue here, and I think I'm going to do wet on dry first, and then we'll do wet on wet. I'm just going to pull off a paper towel here. Keep that from rocking around. All right, so we're going to do Phthalo blue. I'm going to get out a decent amount of color, add some water, make a nice little puddle here. And you can do a gradient wash in any direction. You can go straight across something, you can go up and down, you can go on a diagonal. I'm going to be doing a vignette that does darker on the edges and gets lighter towards the center. You can do this on objects, on a spherical object where you're trying to create that gradient of light across a sphere or a ball. You can do it on flower petals, you can do it on faces and noses and anything that has shape and value. So pretty much anything. So this is why we say it's like one of those core techniques to really learn. So I'm going to start up here. I'm noticing this piece of tape is crooked and it's driving me crazy. But of course it's the first one I put on. So bear with me. So sorry. There, that's a little better. The tape I'm using is just masking tape. It is made in the USA, IPG masking tape. So this is nothing fancy, especially my watercolor in my journal. I'm not too worried about any fancy tapes here. And this is hardy paper, so I don't have to worry about it ripping. A lot of people ask about my tape choices. There's lots of tape choices out there. And I have more professional tapes that are acid-free that I will use for creating commissions and permanent pieces and things like that. So let's start up here in this corner. So I'm taking wet paint. I have a really well-loaded brush on a dry surface. Now, one of the keys to this is I am going to want to make sure as I put this on here, it is very wet and juicy. I don't want any of these edges to get super dry while I'm working. So you have to work quickly. Now I'm going to rinse off my brush. Now I just have water on my brush, and I'm going to come inside here and start to blend out that edge. I'm going to rinse off my brush again, come inside. The great thing about Core is it travels really well. I'm going to rinse off my brush again. And now that I have like the basic shape that I want here, I can go in and play. I can pull out color. So you can see, let me zoom out a little bit. You can see I'm wiping on my paper towel down here. So my brush is pretty much dry right now. I got a lot of paint and water on this page that I can manipulate. You can see I just pulled a bunch of color off of there. And I don't need this to be a perfect gradient. So a few things, wet on dry. So wet on dry, when you're using that technique, it tends to be more vibrant. If you have paper that is maybe a little bit lighter poundage or doesn't take a lot of paint and water really well, you might want to think about wet on dry, but it does tend to stay more vibrant. We'll see wet on wet gets a little more subtle more easily. So you can also layer with these techniques. So if this isn't vibrant enough or dark enough for you on the edges, you can go back in while everything is still wet. So that's the rule. You have to either wait till everything dries completely and do a second layer all together, or while everything is still wet and damp, evenly wet and damp, you can go in and add more color. And a lot of it is about control. So you can see I'm often wiping my brush off because I don't need everything that's on my brush for the whole thing. And then you're going to get to a point, I'm doing a lot here just to demonstrate, but you're going to get to a point where you're going to want to stop. You can see over here, my book is bowed this way. So naturally the water is kind of pushing down in this direction. So I keep having to pull it back up. So I'm just tilting my book a little bit here just to counteract that natural gravity issue. Okay, so I think I'm done. I'm going to let that dry. And again, you can always put on a layer and then go back and put on more layers until you're satisfied with the richness or deepness of the color or the gradient of the wash. So I'm just holding this up for a second while that dries so the water doesn't keep pushing it down towards, I'm like at the very end of my book, so the bow of the page is significant here. Let me help with that a little bit. I'm going to add a clip just to pull things a little tighter. There we go. Hold it down a little, but okay, so now let's do that same thing, but we're going to do wet on wet. So I'm going to do it right next door here. And newer folks tend to like wet on wet a little better in the beginning because it just gives you more time. You don't have to work as quickly. The paint moves a little more evenly. You don't get dried edges. Maybe I'll demonstrate what that would look like if you don't work quickly enough. So basically I just took clean water and I wet this whole square here evenly, up and down, left and right. I don't want puddles on there, but it does have to be significantly damp. The whole thing should have a nice shimmer to it. Like if you look at it under light and kind of tilt it back and forth, like as you're looking at it, you can catch the light a little bit there. You can see there is a nice sheen or shimmer to it. And sometimes with cotton paper, depending on how thirsty your paper is and how quickly it absorbs, you may have to like put on a layer, let it absorb a little bit down to the first, second, third layer of the paper, and then put another layer on top. So you really are working with a nice, wet, damp surface. Do one more little bit. Now, in my layer of paint, I'm also going to be adding wet paint. So it is kind of an art and a science of making things not too wet, but wet enough. So taking that same paint, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go along the edges, and it probably looks very similar to you right now, but my edges are very soft and they are definitely bleeding in. They're not staying put. And I have so much time to work with this that it is not going to dry out. And I can just take, I don't even have to have any water on my brush necessarily. I can just use my brush to pull the paint that's already there across this already damp surface. See that? So wet on wet does tend to be favored. The transitions tend to be softer and just overall easier to manipulate the paint, but it also can get carried away on you really quickly. Like things can get a little too fluid, especially if you're working in a small or a tight space. And you will notice this is much darker as it dries. I did add another layer. I'll add another layer here, but this is going to dry more lightly because there was already water there. So basically, as we add water to watercolor paint, it gets lighter. So you had more water to start with, if that makes sense. Added another layer. And then on top of these vignettes, we're going to do some little, maybe floral arrangements. Let's flip this over. You can always pull color out. All right, I'm going to do that in my other two squares, just with a different color. I'll try to get this darker, but... So I went and did a third layer on here to try to get it to the same dark richness as this one. And I can tell my paper is bowing. Even though it's 100% cotton, you're never going to have perfectly flat paper unless you're working with like super heavy poundage paper. Even then, it's has a slight bow to it. So if you have paper that does not take to a lot of water and a lot of paint, wet on wet is going to be more of a challenge. So just thinking about that. Definitely using 100% cotton for wet on wet techniques is preferred. All right, let's do I'm going to do one over here, and let's do like a greenish yellow maybe. Oh no, I was going to do purple and green, but I ended up with blue. Silly me. Let's do purple. Why not? Another dark color. I was going to do like a purple and a yellow green, but I picked that blue. It's so easy. So now I'm like deliberating. Do I do a yellow? You know what? Let's do a yellow green. So I just took some sap green and some nickel azo yellow to make this kind of yellow green color. So this side, oh, I did, because I was distracted by my color choices, I did wet on dry. And I'm just going to change the shape of the gradient a little bit. I'm going to go further down like this. And now I'm going to really rinse my brush off. And with lighter colors, it's harder to see kind of the dramatic change, but it's still important to be able to create it, even though kind of the distance between the darkest part of it and the lightest part is much shorter. So you can see I kind of did a bow this way and all the way down instead of more circular. So that was wet on dry. Now let's do wet on wet. So I've got to rinse my brush off really good. Wasn't very, very good. We're going to wet this whole square. And I'm working really quickly here for time's sake. You don't have to work this quickly. But I'm excited to get into layering on top of these fun little backgrounds. Just going to let that absorb a little bit. Again, I have that bow here, so we're going to start at the top. Move our way down to the bottom. This one was so easy, I like barely had to do anything. There we go. So you can see in here, like this is a little fuzzier than this. Like they're both very soft transitions. And even up here, like this edge got a little harsher here than this, and it's still drying, but this is a little softer. So this is a little harder, this is a little softer. I swapped the sides. So this was wet on dry and this was wet on wet. So there you go. Two different skills to practice doing gradient washes, both wet on wet and wet on dry, and they can create beautiful effects, and they can be used in so many different things like we talked about earlier. So let's get to putting some fun things on top of these beautiful little vignettes. All right, we're back and everything is dry. So let's get to putting some fun little floral additions on top of this in a layer. So I think we're just going to do some fun loose little flowers and foliage on top. If I think of anything else along the way, we'll add that. But I said I was going to use purple before and I didn't, so I'm going to use purple now. So I'm going to take some of this Dioxazine purple. And I'm going to use it on my blue ones, I think. And then probably something like a magenta on these. So I'm just going to create some, I'm going to go a little bit lighter. This purple is always very, very strong. And I'm just going to create a little, let's go even a little lighter. Just going to kind of dot my way down. And basically I am imagining that there are like, these are stalks of flowers. We're going to add green in a minute. So then to this, I'm going to pick up some sap green, make a nice dark green there. I'm going to add a stalk right down the center with the tip of my brush. Same down here. Skipping over a few spots. Same down here. Boop, 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 boop. I'm going to add some just plain greenery. Just using the shape of my brush to create some leaves. So stem with the tip of my brush and then just a press, pull, and lift. So press, pull, and lift to create some different little leaf shapes. I could even go, let's see, I'm going to add some yellow. So even if I put yellow on top of this, it's still going to have kind of a green hue to it. But it's going to be lighter. See how that's lighter, but it's still going to have like a green tint to it because I'm layering it over blue, and blue and yellow make green. So you can see how over here it makes a darker green. So that's how you can mix colors like right on your page. And then I can even add a little blue to my sap green to make a very dark greenish blue, or bluish green. There we go. We have a little spray of flowers. I'm going to add some more purple, but lighter. Have to go with lighter purple here, otherwise it just looks black. It's too dark. There we go. All right, so let's go. I'm going to skip down here. We'll come over to this one in a minute. We might do something a little bit different over there. Let's go do some magenta. So I have this great Quinacridone magenta here. Oh, I'm mixing off screen so you can't see. Here we go. Quinacridone magenta. And these I'm just going to make kind of some wide petaled, like very loose. We'll do some ones with center, so the petals outside, but you see the center here. Now red or magenta and green are opposite. So if I let this be too opaque on this yellowy green area, it will start to not dilute, what's the word I'm looking for? It will start to kind of cancel out your magenta, make it more brown, neutralize it, neutralize the color. But the lighter area I paint on, the less green influence it has. And I guess if I'm painting up here, I should go just a little bit thicker, more opaque with the paint, and I'll retain some more of that beautiful pink color. All right, so let's give these some stems and also some centers. So for these ones on the side, I'm using this blue kind of green mix here. I'm going to let it touch. I'm not going to worry about it bleeding in too much. And we can add some nice fluffy leaves here. Make them a little wider than the other ones that I did on the last one. And then we're going to put some centers into these pink flowers. I'm going to go with, I guess I'm going to go with a little Payne's Gray, which looks black. And I'm just going to stipple in a little bit of a center. It's only going to be on these ones where we see like the middle of the flower. Some of these are tipped up and we see the side, so we wouldn't see the center. There we go. And let's see, what else are we gonna do on these other two? All right, on this one, I think I'm gonna do just a series of blues and greens layered over top of it in like grass and foliage. So I'm gonna start with this. Actually, I'm gonna go with a lighter. I'm gonna start with a yellow that's just going to be like another layer of yellow on top of this, so it's not going to be very contrasty, but that's okay. That's what I want as I layer with different colors and contrasts over top of it. So we're just going to go with big flicks of blades of grass here. This is a great way to practice like your brush control, going from thin to thicker or thicker to thinner. And then to my yellow, we could add a little magenta to get a little orangey, almost like wheat. That'll be our only super warm color in here. Go even lighter. I'm just playing with texture. Okay, and now that that layer is down, I'm going to go to sap green. Let's get this nice and wet. And things are still a little damp on here, which is okay because I want things to bleed a little bit. They're going to dry pretty quickly. And I'm just doing these flicks of leaves. I'm going to go in with even darker sap green now, and I'm going to do some smaller, more controlled leaves here over top. Now this is still a pretty warm palette. Like my only like warm color is that orangey red, but overall these yellows and greens are warm versions. So if I stick a cool color on top of here, it's going to be very noticeable. So I'm going to be careful with that. That's this color over here. Otherwise, it's going to dominate the whole piece. And I kind of like where we're going with this. All right, so we're going to do this cooler color, but I'm not going to go super cool. I'm going to add more. It's going to be more sap green than I thought. So it's not going to be quite this, that first color I put on there. And I'm just going to do a little bit of, I'm going to do like a couple of big leaves. I'm going to make them pretty transparent as well. There we go. So we have a nice little forest of foliage here, but we still get that nice glow from behind, from that lighter background on the bottom, that gradient. All right, so let's tackle our last one up here. And let's see, maybe we'll put pink on here and just kind of see the difference. Let's do those pink flowers again or something similar. And we'll see how layering the same color on different types of backgrounds. So these are going to look more purpley than these. So you can see already how much more purple that looks. And I did it exactly pretty much the same. Now if I do a darker magenta on this lighter blue here, again, it's still gonna, everything in this is just gonna be darker and more of a purple tone to it. And then over here, I layer it right on top and it's like just purple. It's such a dark blue. So that's again, another way you can mix right on the page. By just knowing that one, your watercolors are transparent. You cannot cover up necessarily anything that's behind what you're putting on now. They will interact with each other, so that's important to know, even if you don't want them to. All right, so let me do one more down here. So in the lighter areas, if you want it to look more pink, it's okay there. All right, and let's add that green. And again, this green will just be a more bluish green because it's going to interact with everything below it. But this type of thing can be fun to play with as you're learning colors and you're learning color mixing. This would be a great exercise to see how they interact with each other, so that when you're trying to do something later on, you're not getting frustrated and like, oh, I thought it was going to be pink and now it looks purple. Well, you have to work around your backgrounds. You have to mask things out or be very mindful and planful about what to do first. All right, we'll put those same centers in. So we really are doing everything the same. So just picking up some Payne's gray, and I'm gonna stipple it into the center of the ones that are facing forward. And then we're gonna take off our tape and we will be done. All right. Let's take off our tape, even though everything's not completely dry, but it's always satisfying. Trying to go in the order of which I put these on here. Now this tape would not be good. If you have really thin or sensitive paper, just straight masking tape might be a little frustrating for you. You can warm it up with a heat tool. Let me show you that. I love my heat tool. So if you just warm it up, so if you ever put like harsh tape on a sensitive paper and just don't realize it, and it peels right off super easy. I don't always have to warm mine up because again, this paper is pretty hardy and it pretty much peels right off without damaging paper. So there we go. We have our 4 little vignettes, couple different techniques. We practice wet on wet, wet on dry. We got lots of brush control practice in there and water control. So thank you so much for painting with me. I'm Shayna Cersei, and don't forget to check out the description for links to supplies and materials, to everything I use in this video and more, as well as leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, especially if you're new here. I'd love to see you back. And for my returners, thank you so much for your return visits each and every time. You're so fabulous, and I love painting with you. All right, y'all, take care. Happy painting.